General Hospital will reveal. Beneath the mist of a gloomy morning in a burn unit in Germany, Liesl silently walked down the long corridor, where the smell of antiseptic mixed with the cold air. Her footsteps echoed steadily on the gleaming white tiles, reflecting the dim light of the hospital. She was no longer the tough woman who always wore an arrogant look. The months immersed in work could not erase the wounds life had left behind. Britt's departure had carved a deep void in her soul, one that could never be filled, turning the pain into the only motivation to keep going. In the following days, she buried herself in complex surgeries and long hours of research, as if only medicine could help her forget what she had lost. Inside the hospital's sealed laboratory, Liesl was not just a doctor, but a scientist. She researched the most advanced treatments, tested medical techniques that the outside world had never known. Here, she did not only heal physical wounds but challenged the very limits of fate. Every patient that walked through the clinic door was a story, a pain, a last hope, and Liesl was the one who decided who would be given a second chance. One day, the hospital received a special patient. A man was admitted in critical condition, his body covered with severe burns to the point where he was barely recognizable. The doctors around her whispered about his slim chances of survival, but Liesl didn't care. She had seen worse cases and never turned her back on a challenge. But when the blanket covering the hospital bed was pulled back, her heart tightened. The face, distorted by injuries, could not conceal the true identity of the patient. It was Michael, Carly and Sonny's son. Liesl stood still beside the bed, her eyes sharp but deep, holding countless thoughts. This was not just a patient she had to save, but a link in a chain of fates she had not anticipated. The boy who had once been Carly's now lay motionless before her, his body destroyed by fire and pain. The world might call it a tragedy, but for Liesl, she saw an opportunity. An opportunity to change everything. An opportunity to fix what life had taken from her. Michael could never return to the way he was. No one could overcome such trauma without leaving a trace. But Liesl could do more than just save him. She could recreate him. She could transform him into a completely new person. At that moment, a bold idea flashed in her mind, a plan only Liesl would dare to carry out. Britt was gone forever, and nothing could change that. But what about Morgan? Morgan had also died in a catastrophic explosion, leaving an unhealed wound in Sonny's heart. If fate had taken the people Liesl loved, then she would be the one to decide the fate of another. If Michael could not return as he was, then why not make him someone entirely different? Someone who had been forgotten long ago. Liesl tightened her grip on the surgical gloves as she looked down at Michael's still body. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, but she had never stepped back from any challenge. With the advanced medical techniques at her disposal, she could make this idea a reality. A major surgery, a perfect recreation. When Michael woke up, he would no longer be himself. He would be Morgan, Sonny's long-lost son. Liesl left the patient's room, her eyes gleaming with determination. In her mind, the plan was already clear. She would not just save a life, but completely change the fate of Port Charles. And when that day came, nothing would ever be the same again. Liesl entered the operating room, her cold eyes reflecting the bright light from the surgical lamps above. Though she had performed countless complex surgeries in her career, this time was different. This was not just a face reconstruction or saving a patient, it was a bold plan, a perfect transformation, a literal rebirth. Michael would not only be saved, but his past would be erased to make him someone entirely new, Morgan. She took a deep breath, her determined gaze sweeping over the assistants around her. The people in the operating room had no idea that this surgery meant more than anything they had ever witnessed. They saw a burn victim, a difficult surgery, but Liesl knew better. She gripped the tools, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. The surgery began by stabilizing Michael's internal organs and circulatory system. His body had suffered severe trauma, extreme dehydration, and was at risk of infection. The most advanced medical equipment was used to sustain his life while Liesl removed the damaged tissue. The deep burns on his skin were replaced with the most advanced skin graft technology, using synthetic tissue combined with living cells to regenerate the skin surface. But this was not just a healing surgery. Liesl was not only regenerating what was lost, she was creating an entirely new person. Michael's facial features were severely damaged by the burns, and that gave Liesl the chance to reshape everything. She used bone grafting, adjusted the contours of his jaw, cheeks, and nose to completely alter his appearance. The most advanced plastic surgery techniques, combined with her genius, transformed the face that once belonged to Michael into something entirely different, someone Port Charles had once mourned, Morgan. Throughout the surgery, advanced technologies were used to ensure that the recovery process would be faster than normal. Stem cells were injected directly into the skin and muscles, helping to regenerate the damaged areas naturally. A biological microchip system was grafted to ensure that the new tissue would integrate perfectly with his body. Liesl carefully shaped each feature to match the memories of those who had once loved Morgan, Sonny, Carly, and others in Port Charles. Not only did she change his face, but Liesl also adjusted Michael's body structure. Old scars vanished, replaced by a completely new appearance. Every stitch, every piece was done with absolute precision. The final stitches were completed, and when Liesl stepped back, she saw the result of her work. A new person had been born. No longer Michael Corinthos. No longer the heir to the Quartermain family. Before her now stood Morgan, the son Sonny thought he had lost. Liesl removed her gloves and looked down at the lifeless body of Morgan with a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. This was not just a medical miracle. This was a change of fate. A new chapter had been written, and when Morgan woke up, the world would never be the same again. In the secrecy of the shadows, Liesl understood that what she was doing was not just saving a life, but completely changing the fate of Port Charles. This was not merely an act of mercy or a noble medical gesture. No. This was a calculated move, a careful step to restructure the balance of power in a world where she had once stood on the sidelines. Liesl had never been weak. She had witnessed too many losses, sacrificed too much to survive. But this time, she was no longer just an observer, she would be the one in control, holding the key to the destiny of those who had once disregarded her. Sonny had lost Morgan in an unimaginable pain, a wound that time could never heal. Liesl had seen how he had thrown himself into life, accepting reality, but deep down, she knew he had never forgotten his son. Morgan's death had left an unfillable void, not just for Sonny but for Carly, and for all who had loved Morgan. Now, she stood before the opportunity to not only resurrect Morgan but to gain power no one had ever imagined, absolute control over the fate of someone who had once existed, someone who had been erased from this life. When Michael woke up, the world around him seemed distorted and unfamiliar. The prolonged haze made everything before him blur like a fogged-up window. Pain, coldness, heaviness, those sensations overwhelmed his body. He tried to move, but every muscle, every joint felt as though they no longer belonged to him. A voice echoed in his mind, but it was not the voice he recognized. The memories were jumbled, unclear, as though they had been twisted, changed, restructured. Outside the patient's room, Liesl stood quietly, observing, her cold eyes sharp. She knew Michael's recovery process was not just physical, but mental. She had not only changed his appearance but had also subtly reprogrammed his memory. The traces of Michael Corinthos were gradually being erased, replaced by the images, stories, and memories of Morgan. The pieces of his mind had been rearranged in a new order, an order that Liesl controlled. When Michael, or rather, when Morgan, looked into the mirror before him, he did not recognize the man reflected in it. The face was strange yet familiar, a figure he could not identify. The memories of his old life began to fade, replaced by stories of a strong, impulsive boy who had loved his family but had also hated what had happened to him. The fragments of the past were seamlessly patched together to create a new person. Liesl had not only recreated him physically, she had reborn a soul, a new identity, an existence that had once been erased. Outside in the world, Port Charles continued on its familiar trajectory, unaware that a storm was about to hit. A person who had once died was about to return, bringing with him mysteries, questions, and consequences no one could predict. Liesl knew that when the time was right, when Morgan fully believed in his new identity, she would bring him back to where he belonged. And when that moment came, the seismic shift she created would change everything forever. Scotty, who had sought out Liesl after months of losing track of her, quietly observed this transformation. He could not believe what Liesl had done, but he also understood that she had her reasons. If Port Charles no longer had room for Liesl Albrecht, she would create a new path, one where she would not only play the role of a doctor but also a person rewriting the fates of those who had once been forgotten. When Morgan opened his eyes, everything around him felt strange. A new life awaited, but it was not as simple as a dream of rebirth. Mixed up memories, vague emotions, was he truly Morgan or just a cruel game of fate? Liesl knew the storm she had just created would not stop easily. And when the door to the past opened, what would await them in Port Charles?